The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. That's a great thought from Daniel J. Borston and really sets the stage for our deep dive today. Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive. This is where we try to cut through all the noise, look at the sources, articles, research, expert takes, and give you the key knowledge you need. And today, we're diving into something really critical, honestly. It's specifically tailored for you, whether you're maybe a UPSC aspirant needing that solid current affairs analysis for mains or prelims, or maybe you're just someone wanting to understand India's socioeconomic fabric better. We're looking at a really important analysis published in the Hindu. It's about a huge national exercise coming up soon.
That's right. Our mission really is to unpack the upcoming Indian census planned for 2027. And the big headline, its new focus on collecting caste data. But this isn't just about counting people. It's this massive complex operation that could, fundamentally change how we see social disparities and how policies get made. So we want to explore how this whole exercise can be made genuinely useful. How do we get past just numbers on a page to actually identify and hopefully support marginalized communities?
Okay, great. So let's unpack this huge task, the census. It happens in two main stages, right? Can you walk us through the basics? Just how does this actually work on the ground?
Absolutely. So the first bit is phase one, the house listing. That's currently penciled in for April to September 2026. Think of it like laying the groundwork. Enumerators go out, they list every single place people live, dwelling units, and collect some basic info about the buildings, the households. It's about mapping out where everyone is.
Okay, the mapping stage.
Yeah.
And then comes the main count, the population enumeration.
Exactly. Phase two, that's set for 2027. And this is where they dig deeper, collecting the socioeconomic data. It's when individuals get counted, and crucially for us today, this is where that caste information is supposed to be collected. It's the chance to get that really detailed picture we've been missing.
Yeah, and what's really striking here, and I think maybe surprising for some listeners, is just how long it's been since we had comprehensive caste data from the census. What's the history there?
It is pretty astonishing when you think about it. The last time individual caste data was fully, properly recorded across the board in the Indian census was way back in 1931.
1931. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine trying to create effective policies for today's India using data that's almost 100 years old. It's completely outdated.
Now, I think there's another attempt later, wasn't there? 1941.
Right, correct. They did try to collect it in the 1941 census. But unfortunately, because of World War II, the economic constraints, the massive disruption, that data just couldn't be processed properly. So effectively, yeah, for a full individual level picture of caste, we're still looking back before independence. It's this huge information gap, really, which is why the 2027 census feels so important.
Okay, and that brings us to the government's stated goal here. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has reportedly said the aim of this caste enumeration is to bring marginalized communities into the mainstream, make sure everyone's included. It sounds very positive.
Oh, absolutely. The objective itself, bringing people into the mainstream, is fundamentally important, no question. But, and this is the critical point raised in the analysis we're looking at, can that goal actually be met with the current way the census works, specifically the way the questionnaire is designed? The sources suggest there are some pretty big limitations right now that might stop the census from delivering on that promise. And it's this gap, between the stated goal and the practical reality that we really need to explore.
All right, so let's dive into that. The questionnaire quandary, as we're calling it. What's the specific issue with the questionnaire based on the draft for the 2021 census, which presumably will be similar for 2027?
Well, the main limitation in that draft was that the question about caste was restricted. It was only asked if the person belonged to a scheduled caste, an SC.
Ah, okay. So only for officially recognized disadvantaged groups.
Right. That's been the practice recently. But if the real aim now is to get data on all castes to understand wider disparities, well, that's obviously a major roadblock.
So if the government wants a complete map, the current questionnaire structure just won't cut it. It needs changing.
Definitely. It needs a significant adjustment. Technically, asking the caste question for everyone except perhaps scheduled tribes, STs, who are often handled differently, is doable. It means changing the instructions for the enumerators, updating the software for data collection. It's possible. The challenge isn't can we ask, it's more will the framework allow it for everyone?
Okay. Now, let's put the direct task question aside for just a second. The census collects loads of other information, right? Things like literacy, education, age at marriage, mother tongue, work status, job type, place of birth, even data on children born and surviving. Could any of these variables help us figure out specific caste information, or at least the socioeconomic status of different castes indirectly?
That's a good question. I mean, yes, those variables are collected, but how useful they are for a detailed, caste-wise socioeconomic picture, well, it really varies. Take mother tongue, for example.
Yeah.
Interesting culturally, sure.
Yeah.
For figuring out socioeconomic status, probably not that important.
Okay. What about the economic stuff? Work status, occupation, that feels like it should be useful.
Potentially, yes. Data on whether people are working main work, marginal work or not working, and maybe broad industry or occupation types. That could offer some insights. But then you hit problems elsewhere. Look at unemployment data. The census tries to get this by asking if someone is seeking or available for work. They've asked this since 1981, believe it or not. But the data quality is notoriously poor. There are conceptual issues. The reference period, usually the past year, isn't clearly defined for enumerators. It often gets poor attention during collection.
Yes.
So, honestly, the unemployment data derived from the census is basically unusable for serious analysis.
Right. So we ask, but the answer we get isn't reliable. What about demographic things like births and child survival? Doesn't that tell us about health and living conditions?
Again, it sounds like it should. But the actual data collected on this in the census has pretty serious quality issues. The sources we looked at argue that these questions, also asked since '81, have kind of outlived their utility in the census context. Why? Because we now have much better, more reliable data on this from dedicated surveys like the National Family Health Surveys, NFHS. Trying to get reliable caste-wise detail on this from the census data is incredibly difficult because the base data quality just isn't there. It's like using a fuzzy photo.
Yeah. And migration. Huge topic in India. Does the census help us understand caste and migration patterns?
It could be really important, yeah. Are certain castes more likely to migrate? What are the pressures they face? But again, we hit a data wall. Previous censuses have shown that a large chunk of migrants either aren't counted accurately or aren't even recorded as migrants properly. This really limits how much we can use that data for any kind of solid caste-based analysis. It's like missing huge parts of the story.
So, pulling all this together, what's the bottom line? If we look at the current questionnaire and how reliable the data is, what are we actually left with for understanding caste socioeconomics properly?
The bottom line is pretty stark, actually. Unless there's a major rethink of the questionnaire and maybe even the process, the 2027 census, as it stands, will only give us a very partial view. Realistically, based on current reliability, we might only get dependable data on education levels, age at marriage, and maybe participation in economic activity that we can reliably link to caste. And that's not much to go on if you want a deep, nuanced understanding. It really hammers home the need for restructuring if this census is meant to fulfill that broader goal of understanding disparity. We're missing too many pieces.
That is stark. Okay, so this leads us nicely into the idea of restructuring the census itself. There's a big suggestion, I understand, about moving certain questions around, specifically questions about housing quality, amenities like electricity, water, and assets people own. These are usually asked in phase 1, the house listing, right? The proposal is to move them to phase 2, the population count.
Why?
It sounds like maybe just shuffling paper, but you're saying it's more significant?
No, it's much more than shuffling paper. It's actually key to unlocking the ability to properly link a person's socioeconomic details with their actual living conditions. Here's why. Right now, there's that time gap between phase 1 and phase 2, could be 6 months, 9 months even. Trying to link the detailed individual data from phase 2 back to the household information collected months earlier in phase 1, often just using a house number or maybe the head of household name, well, it's prone to errors. Lots of errors.
Ah, so people move, details change, the link gets broken.
Exactly. Especially for, say, smaller communities, maybe more transient populations. The linkage becomes unreliable. But if you collect the housing, amenity, and asset data at the same time as the individual data in phase 2, you get a direct, much more robust link. Plus, there's another benefit. If you take those detailed housing questions out of phase 1, the enumerators in that first phase can just focus purely on finding and listing all the structures accurately, houses, shops, everything, and how many people live there. This could seriously improve the basic coverage of the census, making sure fewer places and people are missed. That's especially important in complex urban areas, which often have higher rates of being missed in censuses. It streamlines phase 1.
It makes so much sense when you explain it like that, it seems. Well, almost logical. Which makes it even more surprising that this kind of linkage wasn't done in 2011, or apparently planned for the delayed 2021 census. Feels like a big missed opportunity.
It really does. Because without that reliable linkage, you simply can't answer some really fundamental practical questions that policymakers need answers to. Questions broken down by caste. Like, imagine being able to say definitively, What's the literacy rate for people belonging to Caste X who live in kucha houses, basic dwellings, with no electricity? And how does that compare to Caste Y, or people in better housing?
Right.
Or in our cities, what proportion of the workforce from different caste groups is living in these very basic kucha houses? These are the kinds of questions that pinpoint real deprivation. But we can't answer them properly now because the data isn't connected in the right way.
That really clarifies the potential impact. Okay, so summing up this part then, what's the takeaway for our main goal? Identifying marginalized groups and understanding these disparities.
I think the takeaway is that, look, collecting perfect data on everything in a massive exercise like the census is really hard. Quality can definitely be an issue for some variables. But even with those challenges, a restructured Census 1 that moves those housing questions to Phase 2 for better linkage is probably the best tool we have right now. It's the most comprehensive way to really get a handle on identifying marginalized communities and seeing the gaps between different groups across the country. It might be an imperfect option, but it's our best shot if we structure it smartly. Okay, and to make it even sharper, there's also this idea of maybe trimming the questionnaire, making it leaner by dropping questions that aren't as crucial anymore. Any examples of what could potentially go?
Yeah, that's another important suggestion. For instance, maybe questions about owning mobile phones or computers. 5, 10 years ago, that was a clearer indicator of status. Today, much less so, they're pretty widespread.
Similarly, maybe questions about whether households have bank accounts. That information might be available, perhaps more accurately, from other sources now. The idea is a shorter questionnaire means less burden on both the person answering and the enumerator. It lets them focus, hopefully getting better quality answers for the really essential questions that remain, improve accuracy where it counts most.
Right. Now, this brings us to a really fundamental point, thinking beyond just reservation quotas. The census has produced socioeconomic data broken down by caste and tribe before, right? But the analysis suggests this data hasn't really been used effectively to identify the most disadvantaged groups within those categories for broader policymaking, beyond just deciding on reservations. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair assessment, and it's a crucial point. Historically, it's doubtful whether the full potential of that granular socioeconomic data, even when available by caste or tribe, has been realized in actual policy design. Often, the focus narrows down to reservation percentages. The hope now, the real challenge, is that the caste data from this upcoming census, assuming it's collected comprehensively and linked effectively, will be used much more proactively, used to really inform policies and programs across the board, to target interventions better, to understand the nature of inequality, not just its existence. It's about moving from just description to, well, effective action, empowering better governance.
Okay, so given all this, the complexities, the potential pitfalls, but also the immense potential of this upcoming census, here's something for you, our listener, to think about. If we can get this data collection right, if it's restructured and improved, how might that fundamentally change how we even understand inequality in India? Could it lead to policies that are much more targeted, much more effective, moving beyond just describing the problem to actually driving real change? What could that clearer picture truly allow us to do?
We really hope this deep dive has given you some valuable food for thought on what is a really significant national development. It touches on policy, society, and just understanding the country better. If you found this useful, especially if you're preparing for UPSC and need this kind of analysis, please do give this deep dive a like. And for more deep dives into critical topics essential for UPSC prep, but also just for staying informed, make sure you subscribe to the show. Your engagement really helps us. Leave comments, ask questions below. We read them, and it helps us figure out what you want us to cover next.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.